Thank you, Marina. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. I guess it depends on where you are from across the country. As a way of introduction on my behalf, I'm a market researcher by profession, and I've been doing market research for about 35 years. It doesn't say that I started when I was 4, so the picture looks a lot older than I truly am. But I have been involved in my kind of money-earning for-profit career has been doing market research. But my real passion has been giving back, volunteering, and being a philanthropist in the more general sense, what that means. And it wasn't too long ago that I needed a new challenge, and I started this charity called Give3. And the idea of Give3 was to help encourage more Canadians to be more giving. And through that, we came across, and we now co-host with Canada Helps the idea of Giving Tuesday. Hopefully you heard about that just the other day. So those are some of the kind of programs we run on. For me, it's really just pure fun, and I love giving back and being involved. And because I guess I am involved in the sector, but I'm also a market researcher, from time to time, different organizations would kind of put those two things together and would ask us at Give3 if we could do a survey in the nonprofit sector. And so we started to do a couple of those, and I think our lawyers and accountants said, you know, really a charity shouldn't be doing market research for third parties, even if it's related to philanthropy. So last year we spun off kind of what I call a sister company of Give3 called Sector 3 Insights. So it is kind of a very small social enterprise type research firm. The idea that any and all profits we make are plowed right back into Give3 and Giving Tuesday and trying to boost the sector as best we can as possible. And our goal at Sector 3 really is just to help organizations like you, so nonprofits. To be honest, it's only nonprofits that we work with, so charities, foundations, and whatnot. And it was through that that we did some interesting research, which I'm happy to share with you today. And certainly if you have any questions through today, I'm happy to answer those as best possible. But as well, if you have any comments or wish to follow up, just give me an email, and contact me, and I'll be happy to try and follow up on that. And in particular, this study here, we did it on both sides of the border. We did 1,000 interviews with kind of everyday Canadians, and we did the same in the United States. And they were really just adults 18 plus, we do cap it at 80 years. And the one kind of screening criteria we had is we wanted to make sure that they were somewhat related to giving money to the sector. So they had to have claimed to have donated at least $50 to a nonprofit organization in the past 12 months. So that's kind of the sample. And what we're trying to find out is, how do donors perceive charities? What drives them to give more money to certain charities than to others? And what are the insights we can get and share with the sector? And we think of kind of this summary in this presentation as a good story well told. And this really implies kind of two things. One is a good story. And what we mean by that, and we'll make that a chapter as we go through here, is what does the charity or the nonprofit organization have as its story? What's its kind of its mission and its purpose and its reason for being? And then the other part of that is, how does it express itself? How does that nonprofit or charity communicate? How does its solicitations work? How does its kind of imagery in the marketplace work? So how does it tell its story, if you will? So those are kind of the two halves of today's presentation. And then after that, we'll take questions. So to get started, the first part of it is the good story. And some of the very first questions we asked was just to try to get an insight into how donors plan or not their giving. How do they approach giving? So the little pie chart on the left, or circle on the left, shows the answers to a question, and that was, do you as donors have a rough annual budget for how much you plan to give each year, or not really? And we can see that about a little over a third said they did. And then on the right-hand side, we asked a separate question, which is, and do you tend to have a list of charities that you prefer or often give to and support? Or do you just actually decide spontaneously as requests come up and you just kind of wing it? And if you combine those two, the percent who have a budget, have a list, and have a plan, that comes down to about 20%, 21% of the sample. So which basically means then that the other 79%, or basically 4 out of 5 Canadian donors, are in play and just winging it and spontaneously reacting. They don't have a budget. And they're the ones for which I guess any nonprofit is keen to reach out to and solicit. So they're kind of in play. Now, the next insight we learned from that was that in order to play this game, charities and nonprofits absolutely must solicit. So what this chart shows here on the bottom is when we evaluated donors' views across a bunch of different charities, we asked them for each of these charities when they were last solicited by that charity. And on the left, we can see the people who said, oh, I was solicited within the past 6 months. On the far right, where people said, oh, I was never solicited by that charity. And the height of the orange bar is a percentage of the people within each of those groups who actually donated in the past 12 months to that charity. So you can see a very strong correlation that if you've been solicited, you've likely given, or a third of them had given. But it's the opposite that really concerns me, is that people almost do not give money to a charity that hasn't solicited or asked for them. And when we looked at this across everybody and for all the money, I think it was 91% of the money that was donated from a donor to a charity was as an outcome of being actively solicited to do so. And only about 9% came without solicitation. So it puts obviously a lot of pressure on the need to solicit. And I kind of put in the title frequently, because this is something that I see in by the way, I still work in the the for-profit world, the non-charity sector. And when we deal with the big advertisers, they have this concept of recency. And this idea is that if I saw an ad for Kit Kat chocolate bar, the more recently I've seen that ad, the more likely it's going to affect my choice of chocolate bars. And the longer away that ad was, the less likely that's going to affect my choice of chocolate bars. And so the idea of recency is that you want to continually be recent in consumers' minds as they go to buy chocolate bars. And we see the exact same thing here, because even a 6-month gap from a solicitation from a charity sees a decline in half almost of people likely to have given to that charity. So not only does it say the importance of solicitation, but it also talks about recently and frequently doing it. So the summary point very quickly is, if you don't solicit, you're not going to get a donation. So now the rest of this is, well, how do I solicit? What's the basis of this good story? Okay, so this is kind of starting at square zero, the first thing. And the first insight is donors have to have an understanding of what a charity is about. So we asked people, when we evaluated all these different charities, to score how well they, in their minds, understood what that charity was about. And they used a 1 to 10 rating scale. And what I'm showing you here is kind of the data split out into the people with a low understanding score, a medium understanding score, and a high understanding score. And the height of the orange bar is the donor's intention to donate to that charity in the next 12 months. So clearly we see a correlation. And again, it's the opposite that I'm focused on. The people who have low understanding have almost no intention of donating to that charity. Okay? And the insight that we kind of learned from that was that there's a real gap between people saying, oh, I've heard of that charity, and the average in our database is 70% awareness of people saying they're aware of that charity, but only 34% had reasonably good understanding of it. So there's a real disconnect then, and it's not enough for a charity to have awareness, because as I just showed, awareness of itself doesn't really generate donor intention. People have to understand what the charity is about. So if we kind of think of this as a pyramid or a flow chart or a path to donation or something like that, the basis of this is awareness, but really understanding. Your charity needs to be understood. So now the question is, well, what do they need to understand about me? Because when we look at this, again, coming back to the understanding, and we take a look at the people who've donated to those charities in the past 12 months, yeah, we see that correlation, that actual donation behavior on the right is much higher to charities of which people understand, and yet there's still 78% of the people who said, oh, I've heard of that charity. I really understand what that charity is about, and they didn't donate, right? So, why not? So another question we asked is people to score how they felt about each of these different many charities, and they could have strongly negative, slightly negative, neutral, slightly positive, or very positive feelings towards that charity. Okay, and what we see here then is when we take a look at the top two scores of somewhat positive or very positive, we see then that the donations are quite high there relative to the people who have neutral feelings or negative feelings. And I guess the shock for me was to say, wow, even if somebody understands a charity and is neutral about it, they're still not going to give anything. So not only do you have to build an understanding, but you have to build positive feelings. And I guess this intuitively still makes sense to everybody. So then what we tried to do is understand, well, what is the basis of those kind of feelings? And we had a standard list of 13 different attributes or characteristics of a charity, and you can read them here on the slide. They're not all there. We just kind of showed the most important ones. So these ratings are across all the charities, and some charities people support and some charities people don't support. So we did a little bit of multivariate analysis and a driver analysis of what characteristics of a charity drive people to have more positive feelings of the charity. And the attributes that came out was what we described as being rational. They're all very kind of functional, hard, things like relevance, trust, it has impact, it's unique in what it does. And so these are kind of the driver. And by the way, the length of these colored bars are the weights of importance, and they're proportionate. So if a bar is twice as long as another bar, it's 2 times more important. So things like the bottom half, these things are a lot less important in terms of driving how people feel towards the positivity of a charity. So that kind of became the second tier in this pyramid or path, is that what people understand about you needs to be focused on the functional, rational characteristics, your performance, your mission, trust, etc. But many positive feelings exist. Many charities, just by virtue of being a charity, I can probably name a children's hospital in a town you've never heard of before, and the sheer fact that it is a children's hospital, you probably say, oh, well, that's a good thing, right? So there's got to be more than just that. So what I showed you was the drivers of positive feelings. Well, I have mentioned and talked a little bit about donor intentions and donor behavior. So when we asked people how likely that were they to give to Charity X in the next 12 months, and then the driver analysis of those same characteristics, we saw a complete reversal. So the rational, functional things about impact and trust make people feel positive or not, but what makes them give is quite different. Their intention to give is much more hinged on the importance of emotional connection, being close to the people in the charity, knowing people who volunteer or work there, knowing people who benefited from that charity. And then the number one is a sense of urgency. That they have to have this sense that I need to give to that charity now because it's a real problem. And we see this often in huge behavioral reaction when there is a hurricane or flooding in the south or earthquakes in Haiti. There is a real sense of urgency, and there's a huge measured spike in donations on the various platforms. And so it doesn't come as a surprise, but this is just across a whole lot of charities in general, and it's not just because of a crisis. Charities need to create this sense of urgency to give. So that becomes kind of the next 2 tiers of this pyramid of importance, that on top of the rational feelings that, yes, tick box, it's a good charity mission, tick box, it's trustworthy, tick box, it's has impact. That in and of itself is not enough. You then need to have these personal, emotional connections, and then on top of that, you need to have a sense of created urgency. And then, of course, on top, as I mentioned, if you really want anything to happen, you got to solicit. You got to tell this story to people, otherwise there is no donation. So that kind of becomes the aspect of the basis of a good story. And what we've done ourselves with our own data set is we took all those 9 key characteristics and created a model where we have kind of at the bottom an irrational appeal index score, and then we have an emotional appeal index score, and those get combined on the right to what we call a donor appeal index score. And I tell you that because it allows us to quantify a charity into one number and then correlate that with donor behavior to that charity. And there is a direct correlation that the higher you do on these performance attributes, the more the donor intention and the higher the donor behavior, actual dollars donated. So that was all kind of interesting and it made sense. Now, the key thing is when we then went back and looked at all the data to say, well, how well do charities score in general on these attributes? So on the left is what I just showed you. These are the key drivers for donor intention, which are the same, by the way, as for donor behavior, actual dollars donated. But when we look on the right, which is just how much people agreed, so we read them all the attributes and they could agree strongly, somewhat neutral, disagree. So I'm just showing you the top box score for agree strongly. Interestingly, people are quick to agree that charities do well for relevance and impact, but not so strongly on the most important drivers of creating a sense of urgency, of personal connection, of various forms of personal connection. So to us then, I guess in this you could say, well, then that's the good news, and that is there's lots of opportunity, I think, left for charities to increase their donor appeal. Now, I appreciate that everybody's competing for dollars, but the other way to look at it is we're not just competing against each other amongst charities, but you're also competing against share of wallet for how people might spend money at the movie theater or so elsewhere. And we know that to be true because when there is a real crisis, like a hurricane or a flood or an earthquake, there is a measured spike in donations. And this phenomenon happens over and over again. And what doesn't happen is it does not cannibalize on the rest of the giving dollars across the remaining part of the year. So this increased giving doesn't then suddenly mean less giving somewhere else 2 months later or in the month of December. So it just shows that donors or Canadians in general have a capacity to give when they're motivated to give. And so that's what this kind of points to, is that if you motivate them emotionally to give, there's a lot of upside potential to come. But then we kind of realize it's not just any emotions, and so we probably need to go further. Clearly you can make an advert that has sadness in it, and we see a lot of it on television with children in Africa, flies in their eyes. You know what I'm talking about. It's about sadness. But you know, as a donor, I don't think donors want to feel sad about themselves, right? And Maslow so eloquently summarized his kind of pyramid of hierarchical structure of human motivation. And it's been tweaked and added to over time, but it's generally stood the test of time, that what drives us as individuals, as people, are these kind of these need states, if you will, undescribed on the page, starting at the bottom with physiological and safety needs, but then into kind of feeling good about themselves, self-esteem, self-actualization, and self-transcendence, if we can get there. So this is the set of emotions. If this is what drives donors, then this is what charities have to appeal to. Charities don't want to leverage sadness to make a donor feel sad. What they want to do is make a donor feel like a hero for supporting that charity and help that person realize some of their self-actualization. And we'll take a look at that, and that becomes part of our second chapter of A Good Story Well Told. So the big takeaway so far is to appreciate the importance of personal and emotional connections and a little bit of urgency as well. And now we get into how do we do that? How do I tell that story that leverages these insights? So what we did is we took a whole lot of different adverts, video ads for nonprofits, static ads like display ads or print ads, and we just had a bunch of consumers, donors, people, score them across a standardized set of metrics, and we included in there the same 9 attributes that we just talked about in terms of the proven ones from our donor builder to say, well, if these are important, then how well does this piece of communications or solicitation push them as drivers, okay? So that's kind of the basis of what we use in our testing of comms and appeals and solicitations. In terms of emotion specifically, we have two sets of questions. One is, within this solicitation or this video ad you just saw, what emotions did you feel from watching this ad? So you could feel sad, you could feel happy, you could be surprised or angry by it or doubtful about it or whatever. So these are emotions for the ad or related to the ad or the solicitation. The second set of emotions we asked was, how would you feel if you were to be a supporter of this charity? So now you can see the attributes are a little bit more aligned with kind of the Maslow self-actualization kind of concept, that they would feel proud as being a supporter of this charity, or successful, or like a leader, or they would be accepted in the community, or they would feel less guilty. So these are kind of slightly different emotions. So we have both sets of emotions across all types of different charities and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different donors. So what I have here on this chart is up the left is how well, for all these things, on average, in our data set, do these different attributes get associated with the comms, with the communications or the solicitation. The orange is for the ad, and the darker brown is for the emotions a donor would feel for themselves. And then we modeled these. Which of these emotions drive greater donation intention? And that's the answer. There are all the different attributes. Again, the orange are from and within the ad. And that's kind of where I made the first big observation, was look at the difference between communications, solicitations, and ads that leverage happiness versus sadness. So clearly what donors are saying is that happiness leads them to be more likely to donate to that charity than feeling an ad is very sad, or anger, or fear, or some of those negative things. So that was one kind of very strong aha insight. Now, it's not to say that there are exceptions. There's exceptions to everything. So yes, an ad can work if it leverages sadness. But all things being equal, I would probably place my bet more often than not to say that won't work as well as adverts that, or appeals that leverage happiness and positivity. Caring came out strong, and that attribute is a donor attribute. How the donor would feel as a donor, supporter of that charity. And those who said I would feel like I'm caring came out very strongly. That was the number one attribute people more readily agreed with. And it's reasonably important on the east-west axis. But the one that, if I go and kind of summarize all of this, is kind of this lower right quadrant, and particularly, I guess, within my green circle, more on the left side. So these are the attributes and the emotions that are more on the right side of the page, which means they're important ones, and yet they're not very high up the page, north-south, which means that a lot of ads don't get these across very well. And so we're actually kind of seeing that the strongest drivers are less present in ads and appeals and solicitations. So again, this gave us the sense that, wow, there's really upside potential if charities learn how to better solicit and how to leverage and tell their story well. There's real upside potential. When we summarized all of those emotions, the emotions from the adverts and the emotions a donor would feel, well, we can see then that the emotions that a donor feels, the left side, is actually proportionally more important than the ad itself being sad or happy or having beaten up, abused dogs or whatever it might be. Of course, the adverts can play both of those, that have good emotion within the advert and then also emotionally make the supporter feel like a hero, or that they're making a difference or whatever. Would that be ideal? Those are going to probably be the strongest. So at this point, then, it's really a quick summary of, it appears that positivity does trump, or I shouldn't say that, positivity does do better than negativity, and appealing to donors' own personal self-emotions, self-interests, really does trigger and drive greater donation intention. So I want to give you two examples. I'll show you two ads, and you can be the judge of them. And to be above board here, I'm not showing you any ads or data that we don't own ourselves. So we were not commissioned by MAD to do this. We just simply went into the public sphere called YouTube, went to YouTube, and we just downloaded a bunch of different ads and got banner ads and print ads and video ads, and then we just tested a bunch of them with everyday Canadians, and we just wanted to see kind of what drove better performance. So this was just an ad we picked recently. At the time the research was done, about a year ago actually. You can see it. It's kind of dark. It's about the family and the person who's missing, and we end up with the actual driver who caused the death from drinking and driving. So it's quite a somber, negative type of an ad. Okay, so that is kind of one case I'm going to look at. Then another one is for the Shriners, and it talks about a girl here who had a very much younger age, at age of 7, had scoliosis, and the Shriner came, helped her surgery, and now we can see her as a wonderful diver, and I guess living life with a big smile on her face. So quite a different type of ad, and I guess it's not a huge surprise or tough challenge if I asked you which do you think of these two ads had the best impact on the KPIs, on the key performance indicators. It's not a big hard guess, but there's still some interesting insights. So let me kind of show you just a few of them. So these are the results for the MAD test. And this is for the question where we asked them to score those dozen or so emotional attributes which they associate with the ad. Okay? And in the middle, we see something called the sum count. And the sum count is just a summary count of how many of those dozen emotions did they tick off to say, well, yeah, that one, yeah, that one, that one, that one. And we ended up with a summary of 151%, which means kind of 1.5 emotions per respondent. Norm for video is 180. So we can already see that this ad is not ticking off as many emotions as the average ad is. 2 came out very strongly, sadness on the far left. The orange is the test result for the MAD ad that they saw, and the gray bar is the average from our database for video ads in general across all the different types. So very much more leveraging sadness than the average, and anger was higher than average. Okay? But in general, it wasn't a particularly strong on generating a lot of emotion. And then this is the one for how a donor would feel supporting MAD, as giving money to MAD. How would it make them feel? So again, we see the sum count at 166 is below what we would have expected. So people weren't ticking as many as we normally would observe from a video ad. The only one area that was statistically significant was being protective at 19%, which is slightly above norm. Otherwise, frankly, we were kind of below norm in a lot of these things. And then when we look at the KPIs, so the 3 kind of things we look at is, did the advert or appeal lead to more positive feelings towards the charity? Did it drive greater donor intention? And on those 9 modeled attributes, did it drive a much higher donor appeal index score? Because we know the higher that is, the better it is for a charity. The test group are all those who saw the advert and answered the questions. The control group are people who did not see any ad at all and just scored the charity in general. And so what we see here actually is that having seen the advert, people were no further motivated towards giving than the people who never saw the advert at all. So clearly then the soft side of emotion and leveraging sadness didn't seem to, in this case, drive any positive impact or KPIs for the charity. So let's look on the other side here. This is the Shriners ad. And here, when we ask people, what emotions did you get or feel from within the advert, we can see the count is higher than norm, and people are saying, oh, I got a sense of feeling uplifted, happiness, reassurance, and in general, really quite a strong emotional interpretation from the advert. When we asked them how they would feel as a supporter of the Shriners, again, we saw above average association of emotions for themselves, They would feel honored, proud, caring was very high. They would feel fortunate. So, wow, this advert is really allowing the donor to feel good about themselves if they were to be a supporter of the Shriners. When we looked at the KPIs for the Shriners, tests from seeing the ad versus control for people who didn't see the ad, we saw a statistically significant increase in positive feelings. We saw a statistically higher increase for the donor appeal index. And so we can see, again, this is one case, that correlation, that as one leverages and drives more emotions, we get more of the KPIs. However, there is one shortcoming, and that is donor intention didn't really change. And that is because if we look at this ad, and you can see it as you kind of, in hindsight, if you read it and go through it, there's no sense of urgency. And as we learned from the facts in our database, a sense of urgency is the #1 driver that drives donor intention and actual donation behavior. And if you look at this, it actually kind of literally implies no sense of urgency because this girl now is already saved, right? There's no role for the Shriners in Tori's life. And for the others of millions of children that have been saved, the challenge is over, right? So it's actually not doing a good job creating and leveraging the #1 sense of urgency. Another example I can give, as I mentioned, about sadness and showing poor little children in Africa with starving and obviously the symptoms of, and sad and negative kind of symptoms, flies in the eyes. What happens is I get the sense anyway, that this has been the same every year. Every year I see the same ads over and over again. So the implication kind of to me is, you know what, all of your donations haven't made a stitch of difference. You know, you're giving us all this money and nothing's changed. And I think they could tell the exact same message, but in a completely different story. Instead of saying, we need to save all these kids, and so far we haven't saved many, if they said instead, hey, you know what, last year we saved, pick a number, 100,000 children from starvation thanks to you, John. And if you gave us some more money, this year we hope to save 110,000 more kids. So it's just a question of the same charity, but leveraging positivity instead of negativity, and making John, me, every donor be the hero that thanks to donors, we saved all these people, and thanks to you going forward, we'll save even more people. And so I do think that how a story is told can really fundamentally change donor intentions and donor behavior. And the sense of urgency is really that secret little thing that needs to be in every single solicitation. Now, in talking to people about this, some people came back and said, well, it's unfair, that video has a much greater chance to create emotion because you've got music, you can show tears, you can use 30 seconds to develop your story, etc. And hey, we can't afford video. We do banner ads, we do digital, we do print, we do out of home, we do in transit, but we don't do video. So what I want to do is take a look here and just show you the norms from our database in terms of one attribute, and that is how much they agree or not that the advert was emotionally engaging and stirred their feelings. And on the left is the agree strongly group and quite. So we have 20% on average who would agree strongly and 52% who agree either strongly or quite. And on the right we have for the same question, but for static ads, flat print ads, transit ads, poster ads, we do have a lower score. So it is kind of true that static norm type ads are a little bit less. Nonetheless, static formats have real advantages. They linger, so it doesn't disappear within 5, 6, 10 seconds. People can refer to them and come back. They tend to be a lot less expensive, a lot less expensive to make, a lot less expensive to expose to people in digital formats or in transit or whatever. So there certainly are advantages to them. And just because the norms are lower, it doesn't mean they can't affect people. So we also tested a bunch of static ads. Here is one. We chose this because it kind of had that shock value. It's kind of like, wow, okay. It's kind of hard to ignore or not feel engaged one way or the other by seeing that advert. So same standard questions. Here we've seen the emotions that people felt from the print ad. We see the sum count is above average for static norm. We see that it gave a strong sense of surprise. On the right, a sense of anger, a bit of curiosity as well. So we said, wow, this ad certainly got some emotion across just from within the creative. And then when we asked them what emotions they would feel if they were to be a supporter of UNICEF for this, we got a very strong set of emotional payoffs, above average for successful, leadership, brave, independent, protective, honorable. It's like, wow, people would really feel good about themselves by stepping in and helping UNICEF trying to end childhood marriage. So good old print ads and static ads can be really quite emotionally engaging, just like video. When we looked at the KPIs for UNICEF, the test cell scored much higher for creating positive feelings, and the donor appeal index on the right, and the key one in the middle for donor intentions was also up statistically significantly. So actually, the 3 case studies, it was the static print ad, the 3 I've showed you, that had the only real statistical increase in donor intention. And I think that's because with children, it's almost implied that things are urgent all the time with children. So as a means to wrap up, and I'm happy to open up the floor for questions. When you're designing your communications, it could be just an email, it could be a 1-page solicitation letter, it could be an advert or a video. Some things to keep in mind. One, you've got to actively solicit. And if you get tired or you're just too busy, well, no solicitation, no donation. And everything implies to us here that soliciting more than once is a good practice. Make sure you don't just focus on building awareness, but you spend the time to build understanding so people know what you're about and where you're coming from and where you're going. Unfortunately, though, that understanding is just the price of entry. What you really want to do to win the game is leverage emotion. It's not necessarily formulaic, but we do see that positivity is a better path towards achieving impact than negativity. So happiness and upbeat is better than fear and guilt and the negative emotions. But the real payoff is to focus on the donor's emotions and make sure that the donor, when they read your solicitation letter, say, wow, I can make a difference. I'm going to feel good about myself giving to this charity, and that you can leverage personal connections. Anything in that personal side or emotional side is going to help drive greater dollars. And then that secret sauce, that secret ingredient, is to create a sense of urgency. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to call crisis all the time. It could be a matching gift with an expiry date. That we have until the end of November, we have a generous donor who will do a matching thing. Or certainly crisis with people dying every day has an obvious kind of built-in implication for urgency. But anything that you can do in terms of creating a sense for the donor to act now and not just put it off, because if they put it off, they're less likely to come back to it, and or they might get kind of intercepted by a different charity with their message, because you're, of course, not the only one soliciting. The last thing is, I know I am biased. I'm a market researcher, and I've helped some of the biggest advertisers in the world design and test their ad creative and track their campaigns. So I'm a little bit biased, but for Sector 3 Insights, I don't take a penny, and any profits we get, we just plow back into growing the sector. So I have no real hidden agenda here. It's just that the power of the message is so important as to whether people are going to donate or not donate, that you need to make it strong. It probably costs just as much money to make a bad solicitation letter as it is to make a good one. So clearly you want it to be good. And the ROI, or the return on the investment of doing any type of advertising or solicitation, is going to be much higher when your appeal ticks all these boxes we just talked about. And testing with a sample of donors is a very quick, efficient, controlled way of doing it. And it's a lot easier than an A/B test, or testing different messages with different subsegments of your database. But I don't mean to lecture. I was just trying to say that it really does matter, and getting it right will help you succeed a lot. So that's it. Those are just some of the insights from that. Certainly, there's my email. Happy to answer questions now. You can also visit our website. There's other research we've done, and you can download some of the PDF summaries and stuff from them as well. And I hope this has been a good use of your time, and maybe it's given you some thoughts to be more successful. Good luck.
This has been fantastic. Thanks, John. So much good, real data and information in there. I know that folks are going to be excited to really dig into that. So let's jump right into questions, because I see there's quite a few coming through right now, and I thank everyone who's submitting them. So first and foremost, John, do you recommend that organizations survey their own donors and membership to better understand why they're giving or not giving?
Yes. There's a whole challenge going on between acquisition of new and retention, and certainly south of the border. I haven't seen as much in the Canadian side, but retention really seems to be a big issue. That it's not very high. Apparently, it's been declining. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's like less than 50%, if I understand correctly, of people who gave in the last 12 months who give again in the next 12. So certainly interviewing and tapping into your current donors for retention purposes is great. I also believe that they also have more upside potential, because most donors don't give to just one charity, just your charity. They probably have other charities they support. So in terms of share of wallet, I'm sure there's upside potential, that if you communicate well, play the emotion game, play the personal connection game, there's still upside potential. So yeah, I think making sure your current donors are heard and you understand them is great opportunity.
Wonderful. And we've had a few questions come in about this. You presented obviously a lot of different drivers for giving behavior. Do these change depending on demographic, whether that's particularly what folks are asking about is different generational demographics, but I'm also curious whether you have seen this change, by gender or income, any other demographics?
Yeah, the one that we always take a look at, it seems by default, is millennials.
Yes, that was exactly the question, John. Millennials versus seniors.
Yeah, they're our future. And we've done a fair amount of research just south of the border on giving behavior and looking at millennials and seniors and et cetera. So everything I told you doesn't really change when you look at it by gender or age. The size of the values or the importance may be a little bit higher or a little bit lower, or how they generally feel about charities and overall is maybe a little bit stronger with one age group or a little bit weaker with another. But the implications we have here really are quite holistic. And I think it's just because we're human and we are at play as a function of our emotion. And it doesn't matter if you're young or old, emotions matter. So we clearly did look at this by a lot of subgroups, and the fact you don't see any of them broken out was because none of them significantly changed the story. The overall kind of insights apply really across the board. Having said that, yeah, there are differences in attitudes towards the sector, for sure, between millennials and older people. One of the biggest drivers, which is not in here because there's nothing we could really do about it, is religiosity. That when people self-describe how religious they are or not, the more religious they describe themselves, the much more philanthropic they are. And a lot of peripheral attitudes towards the sector come from that. And the reason why we don't put it in is because as a charity, there's not much you can do about that. It's like gender. There's not much you can do about it. So unless maybe you're a religious institution, or unless you know somehow how to particularly target religious people versus non-religious people. But religiosity is a big driver of human characteristics.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So we've kind of handled the demographic question. So another question that came up was regarding awareness building versus fundraising. So I know what we're really talking about here is the fundraising side of things. Now, the point that was made was, for instance, the ad from MAD that you shared, that one may have served a dual purpose in terms of awareness building and fundraising. So do you have anything to speak on in terms of sort of how to balance those two things, or should those two objectives be separated when you're doing these types of ad campaigns?
Yeah, so even within the corporate world, where the clients we have are the biggest advertisers in the world and they have lots and lots of money, I would say the same thing, but more so for charities where they don't have lots of money. And that is, there's not a lot of benefit to build a lot of awareness without building understanding and leveraging emotion, and leaving them empty. Now, the benefit with the corporate world is they can then come back with another ad and a coupon and a promotion and an in-store display, and they could use what we call touch points. They could use many different touch points to pull in that person. But it's still very expensive to just get awareness with nothing else, because awareness with nothing else is near useless. So what I say to even our corporate clients is save your money, even if you have much lower awareness, but you use the money smartly, that those who are aware of you are knowledgeable and engaged, because it may be a much smaller portion of the target, but if they are moved and emotional, they'll start giving to you. Whereas if you spend all your money building awareness, and let's say you get awareness of your charity to 75 or 80%, but nobody's engaged and nobody understands really what you're all about, that 80% won't drive you any money, right? So I'd much rather have people focus in on knowledge and understanding, positive feelings, and emotional engagement, because they immediately become donors, or much easier become donors. And then next year, add another 10% of the target, and then next year another. So you're building from strength, and you're building from a base of donation dollars. And I say that for charities because charities are nowhere near like big marketers who have multiple touch points and can make all the touch points reach the average person. Charities have very limited amount of gunpowder, and they really have to use it smartly. So when people tell me they have an awareness campaign, I get really nervous. It's kind of, okay, this is not going to go well, because that's not a good objective.
That's an interesting point, John. Okay, so moving on, one of the things we didn't talk about today was radio ads. Now, would all of these same drivers that you talked about for the other types of advertising, would that all fit with doing radio ads as well?
Yeah, it's a fair question. And the honest answer is I don't know, because you're right. We just kind of focused on video ads and then on static ads. But everything in my experience in the with working with the corporate world is to say that all touch points more or less have the same kind of functions or characteristics of success, because it's the same person, whether you get to them by a TV ad or you get to them by a print ad, it's the same person. And that is that person is going to be moved by emotion more than they are by just awareness or just rational attributes. Radio obviously doesn't have the same power as TV because it doesn't have video component, but nonetheless, radio exists. It's a medium that still works despite the onslaught of television with soap operas and then print and then the whole digital world. Radio still exists. So yeah, radio still has its role to play. And I would expect all of this insight to apply to that radio as well.
Excellent. Okay. So how do we balance? So when we're doing ads, we talked about the positive feelings today, but how do you balance creating those positive feelings with also creating a sense of urgency? That might be a bit of a tricky thing for people to understand.
Yeah, and the worst thing is I'm not creative, right? So I apologize. I'm not the one who can just magically make fantastic adverts. Luckily, I'm just a market researcher, which means I'll take anybody's advert and show it to other people and ask them what they think, but don't ask me to make a great ad. But that's the challenge, and that's what we need to look for. And I'm not saying it's easy. Even with Coca-Cola ads or beer ads or Kit Kat chocolate bar, it's not easy for these guys. And all I can really stress to them each time is the importance of getting it right. Never settle for mediocrity and put a mediocre ad on air, because it's just too expensive and a blown opportunity. So do everything in your power to do focus groups, testing, whatever it takes to get great creative, because great creative makes great things happen.
Well, that really leads into my next question, John. Can you offer a little bit of insight on some of the ways that folks can use those sort of experiments? Like you mentioned A/B testing, focus groups, things like that. Do you have some other ideas as well?
Yeah, well, they're really quite different. So one is kind of what I'll call creative development. So how is it that we're going to come up with a briefing to an agency, and what insight is it that we're going to try to leverage? Is it be a hero? Is it let donors feel they lived a meaningful life or whatever? So those kind of things, it just at a cheap level is talk it up, ask people one-on-one, network, take people out for lunch and just ask donors, ask potential donors why they became philanthropists, what's in it for them, how do they feel about certain charities. So that's kind of just what I'll call kitchen sink type gathering. A little bit more formal would be focus groups. You can hire Sector 3 or an Ipsos or anybody to gather a bunch of independent strangers to kind of share their views qualitatively and explore that. You can do the same just with one-on-one depths, so you can avoid the awkwardness of focus groups if you wish, and meet. So there it's a little bit more structured, if you will, but it costs more money, but hopefully the insights are a little bit more full and representative in depth. Third-party research, go to websites like ours, and there's others. There's lots in the United States. There's some from the UK. Just Google drivers of donations or emotions and giving, and just those kind of topics, and you'll start to get a sense of all the stuff that's available to you. But then it's up to the creatives. It's up to the ad agency and somebody with a creative mind to kind of put it all together, and that's why that whole sector lives and exists. It's not easy, for sure. I would encourage many ideas. When somebody says, oh, we've developed the best creative campaign going forward, and they have only one idea. As they say, a man with one idea is a dangerous man. It's much better to have them bring 2 or 3 ideas and let the marketplace react. You can either do that. So an A/B test is, let's say you have 2,000 people in your database. You could just mail or email or send out to 200 of them one of the messages, and another 200 a different message, and maybe another 200 another message, and see how they respond. Which ones click on it, which ones open, which ones donate, and you start to learn just by doing. But that takes time, and it uses up your data set. So what we do here is we offer consumer research, where we'll take your ad or several of your different ads and just go out to a random sample of Canadians and just say, we'd like to show you an advert and get your thoughts about it. And just like what I showed you with the results for the MAD test and the Shriners and the UNICEF ad. And then we come back and compare against norms to say, here's your strengths, here are your weaknesses, here's what you need to fix. That costs more money too, but it's quick and it's scientific and it's controlled and it helps. So some of these solutions will depend on how much money you're risking and how much you want to spend to get it right.
Absolutely. And for some of the organizations that I know are on the call today, you're probably thinking, oh my goodness, we don't even have money to do video or ad campaigns. But the reality is, if you're putting out messaging, even just using social media or newsletters, there are easy things you can do to track and experiment, with what you are doing to see what's working best. So I think everything you've mentioned there, John, speaks to whether you're working at a high level with an ad agency or whether you're really, doing things in-house. It's very important to be tracking.
Yeah, I mean, literally take your solicitation letter or email and give it to 5 or 10 friends and just say, does this give you a sense of urgency? Does this leverage and make you feel good as a donor? Just those key questions. And if they say not really, then maybe you don't have the right ad.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a great place to end off today. I want to thank you, John. This was a really great session. So much interesting data for people to really take a look at and think about. So I very much appreciate you taking the time to present those findings here today.
My pleasure.
Before we sign off, I want to remind everyone that we are going to follow up with you by email tomorrow with the webinar recording. There will be also a short survey. As usual, we just want to hear your thoughts on today's webinar and what you might like to see going forward in the future. Helps us plan out future sessions. Takes less than 5 minutes, so please take a moment to fill that out for us. I also wanted to take a quick moment to remind all of you that we're in the midst of data collection for our 2019 Canadian nonprofit sector salary and benefits report. So many of you will be familiar with this report that we do every few years. Everyone who completes the survey will be able to pre-purchase the final report, which will be published early next year at a 50% discount. And we've also just announced a prize draw of a $1,000 donation to a charity of your choice. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered into that draw. So you can fill out the report as an individual about your own job. If you're working in leadership or HR, you can fill that out on behalf of multiple roles in your organization. So we'll include a link to the survey in the email that you'll get tomorrow, and I hope you'll consider completing that before the deadline of December 7th. We are returning next week on December 6th with our last free webinar of 2018. I know that's hard to believe, but we are very excited to have our small nonprofit podcast host, Cindy Wagman, joining us. She's going to be discussing fundraising tips for small nonprofits. So we'll include a link to that webinar and registration in the email tomorrow as well. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.